Whatever you say nothing when you talk about you know what. For if you know should hear you, you know what you'll get. They'll take you off to you know where, and you wouldn't know how long. So for you know whose sake, don't let anyone hear you singing this song. This first-person film, set in the 1950s, reminds us how Catholic grammar schools insisted on blind obedience. The system was a bully, thriving on parents and children being shamed into silence. The author's answer was resistance, mocking his tormentors as the twisted paper tigers they were. Starting as early as 5 years old, he fought against their unfairness and found standing up for yourself was its own reward. But those powers insisted on whatever you say nothing. When I was in the army wasn't very charming. In my ass they were a pain. They wanted me to obey blindly. They wanted me without a brain. Chapter 2, the Loony Bin. Thorazine, anyone? 1,500 milligrams of Thorazine, QID, 4 times a day. That's enough to make a vegetable out of a maniac. That's what they prescribed for me. I guess they thought I was that wild. Why? Because they said I had a personality disorder. I disobeyed orders from the stockade captain. So he has the right to send me to the bin? Oh yeah. He needed the cooperation of the shrinks in residence, but they need the help of the stockade whenever they have a patient who is too violent. So one hand washes the other, and there are no clean hands. These shrinks are going on the word of an MP captain who was actually a sergeant in the National Guard until he requested an active duty commission. That's how desperate the Army was for warm bodies, especially in the officer ranks. They even offered me officer training school after I asked for conscientious objector status. But here's the hitch. You had to enlist for 4 more years and probably get sent to Nam as a second lieutenant. Or worse, flunk out of that school because you didn't fit into their military culture. You'd still spend those 4 years in the Army and likely get sent to Nam as an infantry grunt. This is another trap some guys fell for that just sounded too good to be true. Once again, everybody was desperately looking for a loophole to survive the Army. That MP Sergeant Captain sounded like he had at most an 8th grade education. So we should give him credit for how far he did get, but he had neither the training nor the disposition to be sending anybody to the Loony Bin if he wasn't sending himself. He was nuts. And we'll see just how nuts in Chapter 3. Thorazine it is. The first morning on the closed ward, they want me to take my drugs like a good boy, and I strenuously objected in my own voice until the authority figure showed up, the major. The psychiatrist was in full battle regalia, full dress, army uniform, thinking he's relating to the troops as a regular G.I. Joe. To relate to him, I use a voice like one of those Lower East Side junkies from the mid-'60s. So like, Major, this Thorazine shit is really a drag, man. I got some Abbott Reds in my locker and some Clean Works. I could shoot up on my own. So like, it wouldn't be a hassle. Sullivan, you'll take your medications like everyone else. Nowhere, man. Please listen. You don't know what you're missing. I interrupted him, singing a little like Lou Reed. All right then, nurse. Give this man some Valium, IV stat. End of this nonsense. Wow, man. What a bummer. I was talking to the back of a white coat. The major was walking back to his office. The next clash would be over scheduling. I made an appointment to see the major. I promptly forgot to tell the nurse about. When the appointed hour rolled around, I was rolling around in bed, reading. Now, from the get-go, this is an infraction of regulations. And as a medic, I knew patients don't make appointments. They are made staff member to staff member. Psych patients are nuts. They can't remember breakfast by the time lunchtime rolls around. The major comes hot-footing it across the ward, straight to my bed. Sullivan. He can't call me private, because patients have no rank. But he'd love to pull some serious rank on me right now. He's pissed. He's been dissed. His collar is wet with sweat. You are 1/2 hour late for your appointment with me. What's wrong with you? You don't look sick. I rolled over, peering over my reading glasses, and said in a voice mocking the upper-class clown John Cleese, Major, you seem to be late, and you're interrupting my reading hour. So I suggest you see the head nurse, my good man. I'll give you good man. You're confined to ward, Sullivan. Oh, yes. Thank you, Major. Good man. The major flounced away to see the head nurse, and he had me confined to ward. But that meant I would miss the half-mile round trip outdoors to the mess hall 3 times a day in January in Denver, Colorado. Now, this was my idea of punishment. I would get my Meals on Wheels delivered to the ward, usually before the other patients even lined up to go to the mess. And I did not have to walk the half-mile round trip to the mess, freezing my butt off 3 times a day. This was better than Brer Rabbit and the Briar Patch, because I didn't even have to ask to be thrown into this Briar Patch. The major did it all on his own. You can't make up stuff like this. Well, you can, but this is absolutely true. So, now I remember. I was in the Loony bin, basically, for disobeying orders. Well, I was lucky I was not in Russia. You know, they put people in the Loony bin for disobeying orders. Pretty scary, huh? This charade went on for weeks. Any conflict with the key authority figure, the major, I slipped into the disguise of one of my many voices. Finally, I asked for a powwow with the great white father shrink about getting off the res and out of the army. I told him all my voices were an attempt to tell truth to power, because I couldn't get them to listen to me until I started acting up or acting out. What did they expect from me? I did not respect or trust people I was ordered to respect just because they were my superiors. They were only superior in rank. That was meaningless to me. This, I argued, did no one any good. It wasted their time and money, but it might give me some good writing material for my version of MASH, which is what you're watching. So, here's what I said to the shrink. So, Major, riddle me this. How can you guys think you're observing somebody's personality when, number one, you've got them all drugged up, number two, you've got them all locked up in a jail-like environment? How are they going to act? Crazy. That's what. For instance, I only imitate other voices in here when I'm stressed out by authority figures like you. When I was out in the real world, people know me as a funny guy. I tell stories. Let me tell you one, imitating a voice. W.C. Fields was known as a big drinker and a confirmed atheist. The drinking got so out of hand, they put him in a hospital where he was visited by his drinking buddy, John Barrymore, who knew how serious Bill was about his atheism. Well, he comes to the ward and he convinces the nurse not to announce him. He wants to surprise Bill Fields. He opens the door and there's Bill sitting up in bed reading the Bible. What, Bill? You? Reading the Bible? Oh, I was just looking for a loophole. So who's the real me, and what are you guys missing when you treat people like this? You want me to go to Vietnam and trust my life to people who treat me like this? There are levels of crazy. You've proven to all GIs you don't respect us by the way you yell at us and treat us like pawns in a worldwide chess game. You teach your young officers to treat troops like children, calling them son and young man when they're like 2 years older than me. Why should we trust you? Especially with our lives? Oddly enough, years later, when I got hold of my Army records, I read the Major's evaluation. He basically disagreed with everything I said, but he got the most important part right. I didn't belong in the Army. The language he used to describe me follows in the quotes. Antisocial personality. What? I was one of the funniest, most popular people on that Army base. Manifested by his difficulty with authority figures. Oh, I was antisocial with authority figures. Now I understand. Was this psychiatrist out the day they covered child abuse and out to lunch when I described the beatings I survived as early as 5 years old? Possible use of drugs. I told you I was a beatnik. That's how we socialize. Drugs. Period of AWOL, allegiance to pacifist groups. Allegiance. It sounds like a commitment to a group, a belonging, pretty social, but to the wrong groups according to the psychiatrist. Difficulty with inactivity, lack of structure, and subordinate position. Now this sounds like I don't like sitting around doing nothing. Without structure? Yeah. And who likes a subordinate position? I won't even start on what the Freudian folks would think of that label. But the crowning glory of this document is impaired for further military duty. What a gift. There, he finally got the hint. I told him I was unfit for military life, and they finally, officially, in bold, black and white, from the shrink's office, came out with it. So here's his official recommendation, in caps, that no further attempt at rehabilitation of this soldier be made because of his severe characterological defect. And Further such attempt would be of no avail. Therefore, it is recommended that this individual, not in caps, be recycled or reassigned or rehabilitated, and further attempts at rehabilitation not be made. That any requirements for recycling, reassignment, and rehabilitation be waived, as provided in AR 635-212, Section 2, Paragraph 7C, 1, for character and behavior disorders. Second recommendation, in caps, that whether or not this soldier is tried is a command decision. And although there is no legal bar to trial, it is recommended that any pending charges or disciplinary action be set aside in view of his severe characterological difficulty, since it is believed that he is permanently inadaptable for military service. Therefore, it is felt in the best interest of the government would be served by his presentation to a board of officers with a view towards expeditious separation from the service under Article provisions of AR 635-212, James Granger, Major, MC, Chief, Psychiatric Service. One would think, with those recommendations, that would facilitate and expedite the end of my stay in this man's army. But we were in the army. And once again, we'll have to hurry up and wait until Chapter 3. When I was in the army wasn't very charming. In my ass they were a pain. They wanted me to obey blindly. They wanted me without a brain. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. I'm gonna trouble the water. I was in the army in 1966. I'm gonna trouble the water. I was in a situation that I could not fix. I was gonna trouble the water. One would think, with those recommendations from the head of the psych services, Major Granger, they would facilitate and expedite the end of this soldier's stay in the army, considering the waste of resources. But this just sends them along to a parallel universe of military minds who have to agree with that paragraph. However, it proved to be a ray of sunshine in a rainy season, in that they heartily agree with me that I am unfit for military life, like I've been telling them since they first invited me to be part of this culture. However, the other administrative executive officers want to ignore medical advice and make an example out of me, as if keeping me in the stockade and the psychiatric ward for 2 months wasn't punishment enough. They want to keep me in limbo, assign me to mind-numbing, repetitive work in the hospital laundry, and in the dark about the psychiatric evaluation. So we go to Chapter 3, the stockade stay. I hope you weren't counting on that sunshine being around for a while, because we were still in the Army, and there was still a war going on, and there were some folks in there with some very wacky ideas about suspending democracy and enforcing blind obedience. How is that for raining on your sunshine? Oh, I forgot. They didn't let me know about any of these evaluations at the time. So that sunshine was not for me. And if you thought it couldn't get any darker, they were sending me back where I came from, the stockade. That's where I called the Provost, Captain Norman D. Strange, Fatso. And elephants don't forget when you call him fat. But he's not the only menace for me to face. Forget about that sunshine for now, boys and girls. It's time for a tornado alert. George Watson was a nightmare in broad daylight to himself and to others around him. He stood about 6'5" and 270 pounds with no fat content. A body type more typical of civilian jails where pumping iron occupies the body and kills minds. I was sitting upright in my hospital bed, Sunday reading matter in my lap. The hospital bed was standard in that stockade only because it was situated on a military hospital base. You could only read on Sunday. This regulation was the brainchild of the Provost Marshal, some Philistine from Texas who named, Norman D. Strange. You could toast your brain watching TV 24/7, but you could only read on Sunday. Back to me sitting up in bed on Sunday afternoon reading. George walks into my room demanding to know what the Army is going to do. Send him to Leavenworth or back to the bin, where they just threw him out because he was too violent, or leave him here in this lockup with no lockable doors where he can sashay into my room anytime he chooses. George was convinced I knew what the Army had planned for him. Wasn't I always talking about the Army this and the Army that, making like I was smarter than the Army, smarter than the officers if you asked him. He said to me, I gotta know what they're up to. Oh yeah, George was hot on this track. He walked into my cell blowing on all 8 cylinders, smoking. He had traction in his feet and purpose in his eyes. He was off in a fantasy world. Oh, I was off, right, in a fantasy world, reading The Lord of the Rings, and so was George, as a matter of fact, different fantasy. But I was brought back abruptly to earth by George barging in and shouting, where are they going to send me? You know, tell me, damn it. As far as George was concerned, he had already talked himself for hours, and nothing I was going to say was going to change his mind, or what was left of it. He wanted answers now. When he said, damn it, he punched the bed right next to my right thigh, and a column of air moved all the bedclothes, and it sounded like a muffled bass drum. There was no way out of here. George was blocking my exit, right side, wall behind, wall to my left, and the foot of the bed was impossibly far away. Imagine my inner monologue. Shit, George just punched me in the chest for punctuation. I'm out of here. I'll crawl up this wall. Well, wonders will never cease as I try to get my Spider-Man imitation in gear. Going up the wall, the bed starts moving on its own. And I'm falling down the wall, and it's a hospital bed. It has wheels. I'm getting out of George's reach because I'm sliding down the wall as he half climbs up onto the bed. I gotta get out of here, and the miracle is I can move the bed and George. One heave thrust up with my back against the wall, and he's sliding away slowly, and I'm blocking his exit with the bed. I get out the door, and we're off to the races around a row of cells with one door open on one side, one in the front, and I'm roaring, guard, guard, so loudly George is holding his ears, running after me, smiling. He thinks this is funny. It's a game to him, maybe. To me, it's more like jailhouse version of Max Sennett movie chase scene, with him chasing me like the Keystone Cops, in and out of these doors, back and forth and stop and slide. I can't catch my breath. Finally, George isn't chasing me anymore. And there are other voices in the cell block. But I'm still trembling, still sweating bullets. Am I breathing? Son of a bitch. The cavalry has arrived and they're talking to George and he's saying he was just playing. There's one sympathetic guard who lets me stay outside the cell block while we wait for Captain Strange, who doesn't like being disturbed on Sunday, but he feels he needs to supervise this incident for some reason. Little did I know it was to watch my reaction to his little surprise. When he finally shows up, he asks, pointing to me, "Why isn't that prisoner in his cell?" "Seems to be a security risk, sir." "I don't think he'll bother George anymore. Put him back." "But sir, you shut up, son. Do as you're told." "Now, Mr. Sullivan," now we call you Mr. only because you don't have any rank anymore. You see, that's a demotion. You're going to learn something today, one way or another. You're going back in there with your Negro friend, and I know you just love them Negroes. Because I got reports. You pile around with them all base, don't you? Now, I'm sure Big George is going to help you learn something today, and I don't want you whining. Because remember, you love these Negroes. He opened the cell block door and said, "Oh, just one more thing you can learn today. It's just a question of mind over matter. I don't mind that you don't matter." The door clanged shut behind me, its steel not quite ringing on account of the many layers of institutional paint covering the stains of the last bloodletting in here. Did I tell you why George is in jail? He was in Vietnam. Well, he was sent from the Loony bin. He was in Vietnam, and all military leaves back to the States were canceled just before his mother died. He asked for a compassionate exemption, and because they said he couldn't go home for his mother's funeral, he lost whatever fragile grip he had on his rage. He walked into the orderly room, emptied 5 rounds from a .45 into the first sergeant. And as the company commander came flying out of his office, the second .45 was in his chest, blowing him back into his office and to kingdom come. Killing 2 men in 2 minutes. I'd say George had a problem with his temper. Back to my cell. Fear was in the air. It was physical, palpable, enough to have its own smell, like the ozone off those electric train sets from the 50s, that transformer cell. There was one more element no one could have predicted. None of the players, especially the one who played the hand so well, an element of surprise. George seemed to be glued to the boob tube, watching some reruns of the 1940s Bugs Bunny cartoons. I could hear the signature, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da, that's all, folks. Then another cartoon started, and there would be a long string of them to occupy George for a while. As it had been a pretty crazy, tense day, I thought this would be a great time to take a break with a hot shower. Whatever you say nothing when you talk about you know what. For if you know should hear you, you know what you'll get. They'll take you off to you know where, and you wouldn't know how long. So for you know whose sake, don't let anyone hear you singing this song.